Good day, everyone. I'm Holly Hoagland, APQC's Process and Performance Management Principal Research Lead. Thank you all for joining us for this webinar on Management Systems Principles and Process Frameworks. Today's speaker is Colin Christmas. Colin is Managing Director at Eagle. He's an experienced professional with over 20 years in the food industry. Colin's had the privilege to live and work in numerous countries and around the world, which helped develop an excellent understanding for process, systems, and standardization while working in different cultures. Colin has a bachelor's degree in computing and business analytics with a specialization in quality control, quality management systems, and business process management. He's also had a program completion certificates for food safety management and an executive leadership program. So without further ado, I'd like to hand this over to you, Colin.
Thanks very much, Holly. So I appreciate the opportunity to go through what I see as management systems, principles, and process frameworks, and essentially how they fit together. So as Holly mentioned, I'm Colin Christmas. If you need to find me, these are my details, email and LinkedIn information. So where do we start? So essentially we start talking about quality management principles or principles in general. And ultimately I'll go back to the beginning of my career, and when I was a little bit younger, I didn't see the real importance of principles. I thought they were very high level. I thought they were rather fluffy things that really didn't have a lot of use. So I've come to learn over many years that that's certainly not the case. And ultimately now I see the importance of defining the principles for an organization and ultimately providing a structure so they can be implemented and sustained across an organization. So what are principles? They are really a fundamental set of beliefs, norms, rules, and values that are accepted as true. And then why are they important? Well, essentially, when you get the principles right, you really then have a unifying basis for values and beliefs that shape the organization's purpose, mission, and culture. So this is where they really fit in nicely together. So it's really important that organizations don't just define this just for something. It's important to have a mission statement. I think now we see organizations that's going much further, that's really beginning to ask some very deep questions in terms of what is their purpose, where do they fit in the world, where do they fit in society, and how does it drive the culture of their organization. And this is where the principles come in and play a really key part in the organization. So when we look at that, let's see how do they relate to management system principles. So we have the high level organizational principles that fit into the mission statements and purpose. But within a management system, here are some examples that come directly from ISO, which is part of their quality management principles. And as I mentioned before, I've come to realize how important they really are if they are embraced by an organization. So they have to not be words, they have to be beliefs, they have to be really implemented in a way, an organization that truly values what they are and truly embraces what they are. So with this, with quality management system principles, we have customer focus, we have leadership, engagement of people, process approach, improvement, evidence-based decision-making, and relationship management. So with that then, okay, we understand what principles are, we understand that they can be applied to a management system like an ISO 9001 management system. Then the key thing is how do they fit with process frameworks? So let's start from the beginning and say, really, what are process frameworks? And process frameworks are reference models that support the description, assessment, and optimization of business processes. So with that statement, it's really important to understand that once you have a reference model in your organization, once you have a set of principles in your organization, how do they fit in together? And ultimately, what are the challenges for getting those to integrate into the same organization? So here's the challenge here. How do they integrate management system principles with process frameworks? So let's look at a process framework reference model. So your organization may be looking at this, it may be slightly different. Some organizations have 4 levels of process, others have 5. So this is just one example that I've come across that I think is rather relevant. So with process frameworks, people talk about levels, and we have basically a documentation associated to those levels. So you have level 1, which is really leadership processes, and that can be corporate business strategy, the plan. That's the very high level, level 1. You have level 2, which is more process groups. So this is actually, you're looking at the business, your key policies, quality, for example, your quality policy could fit in here, a safety policy could fit in here also, an environmental policy could fit in here also. So that's your level, your high level, level 1 and level 2 processes. And then we look at level 3 to 5, and ultimately these are more of your operational processes and supporting processes, supporting levels that support the level 3. So level 3 is operational processes. It really is the what, the where, the when, and the who. Process manuals, process maps, for example, really functions are sometimes defined as operational processes in some organizations. And then below there in level 4, we have standard operating procedures. So this is now that you're getting into that, how do you do something, work instructions, workbooks. So that's your SOPs at level 4. And then finally, what are the documentation that's needed to support those processes? So you may have various documents, you may have checklists, you may have records. What records do you need? What records need to be controlled? And ultimately, where do they need to be stored? And then finally, what reviews need to be in place? What operational reviews need to be in place to support all of the other levels? So those reviews could be a daily operational review, weekly operational review. It could be a monthly operational review. It could even be an annual management review, like a management review of quality that could be done annually. So with that, now we understand the reference model. We then try to understand, where do the principles fit in? So when we look at this, ultimately the principles are linked to level 1 and level 2. So when we look at this, let's break that down. As I mentioned before, the purpose of the organization really is the why. Why are we really here? So the purpose statement, the mission statement, the key policies that you have, the level 2, the quality management policy, this is really where you want to bring out your principles in your organization. Are you customer focused? Well, that needs to come into your purpose statement. Are you about empowering or engaging your people? That needs to come into some of the policies. Are you about decision, fact, data-based decision making? Ultimately, these are the key things that you really need to define in terms of why the organization exists, what is its intent, and ultimately what the purpose is. So when you really look at the principles, that you have to go back to your level 1 and level 2 processes and make sure they're fully aligned. And then the integration between process frameworks and management system requirements are linked to the reference model of level 3, level 4, level 5. So as I mentioned before, in my younger days, when I first started looking at management systems, this is where I ended up. I really started getting into the requirements. How does it work? How do I implement it? How do I get it into an organization? So this is the more nitty-gritty of getting things done within the organization. So ultimately, very important also. And with this, how does that structure to a process framework? Well, ultimately, when you look at a management system, it really is the standard, is effectively the what do I need to implement, the what are the requirements of a management system. So that really is level 3. That's you start mapping your operational processes there at level 3. And then ultimately, once you have your management system in place, you have a set of interconnected processes and procedures, and that's where level 4 comes in. And then ultimately, to have a management system to run and you execute it, you need documents, you need checklists, you need controlled records, you need to have reviews. And that ties into plan, do, check, act, and all the other fun stuff within a management system. So really, that's the key takeaway here is think level 1 and level 2 for the high level principles, and link level 3, 4, and 5 to the requirements of the management system. And then ultimately, when we look at this, we look at an example of the ISO management system standards. This is an example of what is referred to as Annex L within an ISO management system. It has a clause structure of 1 to 10. And then ultimately, a process framework on the right-hand side relies on processes, documents, records, and reviews. So hopefully now you're beginning to see how these two really fit in together, and ultimately how interdependent that process frameworks are with management systems. And then let's start looking at some of the principles that I mentioned of a management system. So principle number 4 is the process approach. From an ISO perspective, they have a key diagram here from one of the audit practices groups that refers to the SIPOC model. SIPOC model is a process where it supplies inputs, process outputs, and customers. And ultimately, when organizations get this right, there's a huge amount of value that's associated to understanding your process, mapping your process, implementing your process, and sustaining the process. So again, the philosophies of ISO are very closely linked to a process framework approach here. So what are the major challenges of integration? So I've talked about principles, I've talked about management systems, I've talked about process frameworks, but how do they tie in together, and what are the challenges? Well, I think one of the starting points that I've seen in my time in industry is ultimately there are competing or different objectives between different functions within organizations. So in organizations, you may have systems managers, and in a lot of organizations, you have business excellence managers. And unfortunately, sometimes there is a disconnect. And this has happened in my experience, and it's something I've looked at. And ultimately, a lot of the problems come back to is the objectives. And in a lot of cases, the objectives of a systems manager, a quality systems manager, for example, really is about implementing a management system and making sure it conforms to the standards, it meets regulatory compliance. These are the kind of objectives that are typically set for a systems manager. And then on the other side of the coin, you really see business excellence managers, and ultimately they are there in the organization really to define process and ultimately to drive improvement. And if there is a disconnect between those two functions, then ultimately you have a problem with integration. So ultimately, how do you resolve that challenge of integration? We have here with principle number 2, leadership. So really it's up to the leaders of an organization to identify that systems managers and business excellence managers really need to come together. So with the leadership piece, it is the leaders of an organization that needs to make sure there are shared objectives and there are shared responsibilities between those two functions. And ultimately, when there are shared objectives, these organizations, these functions within the organization will come together. And ultimately, you will have these two functions working together, mapping the management systems requirements. This will typically be owned by the systems manager, and the process framework requirements are being mapped by the business excellence people. And with that, there is a better understanding of how they fit together. And if they're not, if they have their own unique objectives, you can run the risk of they will work independently in a silo, and that's where the missed opportunity really is. So if that's the opportunity, how do we make sure that management system principles are applied using a process framework? Well, this is a great example with process frameworks. You typically have process owners And with management systems, you typically have process owners. So once you've defined your process or your processes across your organization, you then assign a process owner to each process. And then each process owner then can consistently apply the key principles and plan, do, check, act across the whole of the organization. And it's really good when you see this working. You see a lot of the process owners that fully understand and embrace PDCA. They fully understand the management principles. And this is where you can create many mini PDA cycles within the organization. And this is how you get the process owners really owning the principles and really talking about the principles to people within the organization. And you have this great cascading approach that's set throughout the organization. So one of the key things is really just to challenge the process owners. Do they fully understand PDCA? Do they fully understand the management system principles? So that can be some of your opening questions to really test out that philosophy. Okay, so once you understand the PDCA approach and process owners, we now have principle number 3, which is the engagement of people. So ultimately, if you can engage your workforce, if the organization can really connect the dots within the organization, the principles and process frameworks all fit together, you have the ability to create competent, empowered, engaged people at all levels through the organization. And ultimately, if they understand their processes and their interdependencies with other processes, this is really where you enhance its capability and you create and deliver value. So ultimately, it's really important that each process owner really understands their inputs, really understands their outputs. And when they apply the principles such as customer focus, which really can be an internal customer focus as well as an external customer focus, that's where you really start driving the results. If one function understands that an input is key and timely, and the content of what they have to deliver as an output also needs to be timely, and what that means to the person that they're providing that information to or service to, and then ultimately the organization can run very effectively and very efficiently. So ultimately, we've talked about the challenges of integration. We've talked about what process frameworks are and principles are. And I think that's great if you're a systems manager, that's great if you're a business excellence manager, but who is the most important person in the organization to really fully understand this and to sponsor this and support it is ultimately the CEO of the organization. So sometimes the challenge, definitely for systems managers, is really how do you articulate the need and the purpose and ultimately what a management system can deliver that is linked to business excellence. So how do you translate that a CEO is going to embrace and understand? Well, the key thing is principle number 5, improvement. So if a CEO fully understands that a effective management system is really about conformance and compliance, which is ultimately the management system piece, plus efficiency and effectiveness. Because over time, you really can drive performance if they're combined. And ultimately, this is what a CEO will buy into. The optimal efficacy of a management system integrated with a process framework really is conformance, compliance, plus efficiency and effectiveness. So that's a really key thing to think about when you're looking at management systems in your organization and ultimately looking at improvement. Are they really delivering the value that you want them to? And then for a CEO, principle number 1, customer focus. So ultimately, are customers satisfied with the output of your products and services? So we go back to the SIPOC model, the output and the customer really is key. And ultimately, if the customer focus is there, you will see that in the results. And ultimately, I think this is a great slide to put in front of a CEO when a CEO may be asking some questions to say, well, what is the return on investment of a management system? What is the return on investment of a business excellence team that drives improvement? Because ultimately, when you get those two working together, in this example, this is a quality management system that was implemented in an organization, and these were the results. The quality management system was implemented in 2006, and then these are real results that came out, and by 2013, the organization that worked really effectively between a quality management system and a business excellence team really drove real internal growth within an organization. And I think these are the case studies that you put in front of a CEO that equate improvement, drives customer satisfaction, drives growth within your organization. And then CEOs will be more than happy to sponsor these kind of initiatives. But ultimately, you have to think of the language that's going to resonate with the CEO when you're pitching a management system business excellence initiative to the top of the organization. And then finally, what is the key takeaway for systems managers and business excellence managers from this webinar today? Well, you've listened to the whole webinar, and ultimately, if you're a business excellence manager, hopefully you've got some better understanding of the management system principles. And if you're a systems manager, you have a better understanding of the process frameworks. But what I would say is the key principle, we should look at relationship management. And relationship management can be internal within an organization, it can be external within an organization. Effectively, it's defined as interested parties. So I think that's really important to keep that in mind. If you're a systems manager, your interested party is your business excellence manager or your business excellence team, and vice versa. So the key takeaway for me really is that if you're a systems manager listening to this webinar today, your action point really is to start talking to the business excellence team, start building competencies and skills for yourself all around process frameworks, start learning much more. And vice versa, for business excellence teams, your starting point really is to better understand management systems. And there's lots of opportunities there with hopefully within your organization to look at whether your organization is implementing an ISO management system or if they have other compliance management systems. And that really is a great opportunity to learn those things. I've had the privilege to work on both sides of the fence. So I have maybe the great opportunity to learn how these really work well together. But I've also had the challenges of coming across systems managers that didn't fully understand process frameworks and business excellence managers who didn't fully understand management systems and concepts around PDCA. So ultimately, I've seen the good and I've seen the opportunity as well. So that really is my key takeaway for the audience today, is to see how those two fit together. And if your organization is not doing that, then there's a huge opportunity right in front of you. So once again, thank you. That's my presentation. And as I say, if you need to find me, these are my email details on my LinkedIn. And once again, I thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you very much for that presentation. I know you and I have talked about the fact that there's a lot of beauty when you combine the process side of the house with the quality side of the house and have them focus their efforts on the same goals. So thank you for sharing those insights. So there's additional next steps. You can check out more information on this topic. There's resources on the SIPOC diagramming, as well as some research we've done previously looking at that integration between frameworks and certification standards. There's also several links here for you to take a look at more things around ISO as a quality management system. You can also stay up to date on our process and performance management research projects. And if you have a story or a great example of some success that you've had that you want to share, please feel free to reach out to me at any time. We learn best when we learn from each other. So thank you again, everyone. You can also connect with us here on social, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.